Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Tuesday, April 10th. And the Yankees, after 10 games, are a 500 ball club and very much look it. But despite the aggravation that these 10 games have given us, there were some good things that happened as well. And I think we're seeing a couple of players start to emerge. But we'll get to all of that in just a few minutes. You can follow us on Twitter at Bombers Podcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer each and every week in our Mailbag segment here on the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher. You can also drop us a line if you like, 646-854-4959. And as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe at bronxbomberspodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us. We love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we ask your biggest area of concern for the Yankees right now. And I'll answer a fascinating question from one of our followers about the greatest rivalry in Major League Baseball other than Yankees-Red Sox. And Yankees-Red Sox resumes in full force tonight at Fenway. Also, I'll recap the highs and lows, the heroes and the goats of the first 2 weeks of the season, and then a flashback that I think you're going to enjoy to a Yankee pitcher of yesteryear and his legendary season. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Which of these Yankees was the first relief pitcher to win the American League Cy Young Award? Was it A, Rich Gossage, B, Mariano Rivera, C, Sparky Lyle, or D, John Wetland? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
Well, it's been a rough rollout, to say the least, with our big bats alarmingly quiet. Our starters are not giving us the length we need, and we'll cover it all. But I was trying to think. I can't remember the last time there were this many injuries out of the gate. And it's not an excuse. There's plenty of big names on the roster that are just, not producing and are totally healthy. But it's been a parade to the DL these first couple of weeks. Honestly, it started with Bird and his incredibly fragile ankle. He's out for at least another month. Actually, no, it started with Clint Frazier. Clint Frazier in spring training got a concussion. He's improving slowly but steadily, but still not playing in games. Ellsbury had an oblique injury in spring training, and now he has some kind of a hip problem. So who knows where that's going. Then Hicks, with an intercostal muscle strain, whatever that is, in Game 1 in Toronto. And then also in Toronto, Billy McKinney sprains his shoulder after crashing into an outfield wall. We got CC on the DL with a bad hip. That seems to be a minor blip, to be honest. He was actually reportedly surprised that they put him on the DL. But we got Brandon Drury with migraines and blurred vision out indefinitely. And a kind of alarming subplot to that story is that he seems to have had this problem for years and hasn't talked about it. I'm sure we'll get more details on that as this unfolds, but that's not a good situation at all. And toss in Tyler Wade with the flu. Sanchez has got cramps. So look, these things happen to every team every year, injuries. They just happen to us at the start. And the good news is that we're a deep team and survived it so far without totally tanking. I mean, a 500 record is certainly nothing to stand up and cheer about, but it could be worse. And, second of all, none of these injuries seem to be long-term, with the possible exception of Drury. But I thought I'd try something new in today's segment, and let's cue the music. There it is. And the name of this segment is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, based on the 1966 Western, directed by Sergio Leone and starring the great Clint Eastwood. But let's start with the good. And there were things to cheer about these past few weeks, and number one has to be Sir Didi Gregorius, who has been absolutely lights out. Didi's currently hitting .375 with 10 RBIs. That's just in 10 games, folks. 1 RBI per game with 9 walks, and has the second highest OPS in all of baseball at 1430, just behind Bryce Harper, whose Nationals were swept over the weekend by the upstart Mets. That to me, the Mets, is one of the big stories of these first couple of weeks, along with the fact that Shohei Ohtani, who had an absolutely horrendous spring training, is apparently the real deal on both sides of the ball, just playing great. But back to the Yankees, Didi, to me, has all the earmarks of a perennial all-star and a team leader, potentially a captain. Comes through when you need him to, which others tend not to. People may not like to hear this, but Judge, for all his value, when he comes up in a big spot, I'm never particularly optimistic. And unfortunately, he contributed to that perception on Sunday when he came up with the bases loaded in the 11th with nobody out, chance to win the game, and proceeded to do the worst thing possible, hit into a double play with a lead runner out at home. But Judge, although he didn't make the good portion of this segment, was actually a runner-up. His OPS is higher than you might think, despite the 13 strikeouts, a number that's dwarfed by Stanton, who we'll get to. But Judge's OPS stands at 938, which is quite good. And his 9 walks lead the league. Of course, we'd rather see him hit home runs than walk, but I think that'll come. And of our 3 big guns, he's the only one that's firing in any way, shape, or form. But after Didi, another player who makes the good portion of this segment is Luis Severino, who was great in both his starts. In 13 innings pitched this season, 14 strikeouts, just 2 walks, and he won both of his starts. His ERA sits at 1.38, and his WHIP, walks plus hits per innings pitched, is a microscopic 0.77. So Severino, clearly our ace, but right behind him is Tanaka. Tanaka, at least in his first 2 starts here, has quieted doubts raised by his first half performance last year. In 2 fewer innings pitched than Severino, he has 1 more strikeout, so 15 strikeouts in just 12.1 innings. Tanaka's ERA sits at 2.92, and he has walked not a single batter thus far this season. So our top 2 of our rotation are in excellent form, which is very good news. The other 3, not so much. Gray, I'll be honest, I've been disappointed in Gray's performance thus far as a Yankee. He pitches in constant trouble, very few clean innings, and if he does give you a couple of clean ones, like the first 2 innings of that one game that we won against Baltimore, he comes out in the 3rd inning and all of a sudden starts walking the bottom of their order, just loses the plate completely. So that's not inspiring. Sabathia has looked a little ragged as well, but we must begin the bad portion of this segment with Jordan Montgomery, who, could have been a hero on Sunday with a strong performance, and who was handed a very nice gift basket of 5 runs in the bottom of the first and proceeded to suffer death by 1,000 cuts. You could see this win slowly, painfully slowly, start to seep away as Montgomery could not get through an inning without working himself into serious trouble. His fastball command was abysmal, and like Gray, he was handing out walks to the lightest hitting members of that Orioles order. Unforgivable, and it really bit him. It bit him hard. And of course, the anemia that's currently plaguing large portions of our batting order did not help either. But Montgomery, in that fiasco of a game on Sunday, if somebody, Satan, for instance, decided to draw up a plan for how to torture Yankee fans, that game would serve very well. It was really brutal to watch. But Montgomery allowed a career-high 10 hits and threw a grand total of 86 pitches over just 4 1/3, mostly ineffective innings. And that's the other problem with the bottom 3 of our order right now. The ERA looks pretty good, but that masks the fact that they are not giving us length. Boone has had to go to the bullpen way more and way earlier than he was hoping to. And, I know the bullpen has been a bit maligned so far, but this is actually an area where I'm starting to see real improvement. There have been slips. The Smoke grand slam off of Robertson in Toronto, that was inopportune to say the least. But since then, Robertson has been back to his usual self. I don't believe he's allowed a run since then. Domingo Germán, despite the 2-run shot on Sunday, was very impressive, I thought. He racked up 5 strikeouts. Chapman has been very good. And the much maligned Dellin Betances, justifiably maligned, at least over the past year or so, despite giving up a home run on his very first pitch of the season. That was inauspicious. But Betances has looked much better his last few appearances. But one relief pitcher for the Yankees, who, for reasons unknown, I've perhaps been guilty of thinking he's better than he actually is. But one reliever who has not done the job is Adam Warren, and he makes the bad portion of this segment as well as Montgomery. Now, just for the sake of clarity, this is not my final verdict on these guys as players. I am not saying Montgomery and Warren are bad pitchers. I'm saying that in the portion of games that I'm reviewing, they have been bad. Warren, his ERA is now just under that 5 mark at 4.91. He has been unable to close the door. Warren gave up a run in the 12th inning of the game on Sunday, the winning run, it turned out. His command has not been sharp, so Warren needs to get it in gear. Now, before we get to our ugly section, I want to give you a few runners-up that almost made my good section. Miguel Andujar, who started spring training red hot and then tailed off, was forced into big league action by the departure of Brandon Drury and had a tough time at first, but slowly he's looking much better at the plate. He's gotten some big hits, and defensively he's looked outstanding. With a strong, accurate arm, and that was the big concern with Andujar, his defense. But there's been zero drop-off with Andujar patrolling the hot corner. 2 other runners-up would be Austin Romine and Ronald Torreyes. I'm sure you remember that last year at this time, due to the injuries to Sanchez and Gregorius, those 2 guys helped us get through April with a winning record, and they filled in admirably over the weekend. Romine with 3 hits on Sunday, his on-base percentage now at .438. OPS over 800, batting average right at the 400 mark. Small sample size, yes, but those are good numbers. And Torreyes can be irritating because his base running can be awful. And in that, he has a lot of company, frankly. The Yankees' base running blunders so far this season have been tough to watch. I think that base running is a lost art in Major League Baseball. I see this all over the league. I watch a lot of other teams. It's the same thing. And Torreyes I like. He gets big hits. He did last year. He did this weekend as well. I know there's been some debate about whether clutch hitting exists. Ask yourself as a Yankee fan if in that bases loaded situation on Sunday with 0 outs and a chance to win the game, if you'd rather see Judge or Didi up in that spot. If you say Judge, I'm pretty sure you're lying. I'd rather see Didi up in that spot 6 days a week and twice on Sunday. Absolutely. I'd rather see Torreyes up in that spot. He gets big hits. And I love contact hitters. I mean, best of both worlds, you have both, right? You look back to DiMaggio. I mean, he could hit for power and average while not striking out at all. Today's player that might be more like that would be Jose Altuve, who can also hit for power and average. But Torreyes, in his handful of appearances, is hitting .357, so good for him. The ugly segment here has to be headlined by Stanton, who I'll get to in a second, but a supporting player has to be Gary Sanchez, who, it should be said, has looked much better behind the plate and so far has 0 passed balls and 0 errors after leading the AL in both categories last year. And in a couple of plays at the plate, he's handled very well, so there's that. But then there's his bat, which is so cold, it might as well be a giant icicle. And this surprised me. This surprised me a lot. He seemed to have his stroke down in spring training, but spring training is spring training. Ask Shohei Ohtani, who looked absolutely dreadful and now looks like Babe Ruth. But Sanchez has just been a nightmare at the plate so far, hitting .063. That's .063 with just 2 hits and 32 at-bats. And, what is there to say? I mean, he says it's mechanical, and he did start slow last year as well, but not this slow. And we all know these things can feed on themselves. Hitters start to overthink, they overanalyze, and lose touch with their instincts. And that appears to be what's happening to the headliner of this ugly section, Giancarlo Stanton. And the worry here is that, unlike Sanchez, he has no track record as a Yankee, so the fans are going to be merciless when he fails. And he has failed spectacularly these first 2 weeks. Just 10 games, but a bad 10 games. He had a promising start with a homer in his very first at-bat, and a second one later in that same game in Toronto. And after a platinum sombrero, which is a 5-strikeout game in his Bronx debut, he had a homer in the very next game. But it has been a veritable strikeout fiesta for Mr. Giancarlo Stanton, who in his first 10 games has had 2 platinum sombreros and has left a sizable battalion of men stranded on base. He's hitting .167 with 20 strikeouts and 42 at-bats. Now, there's plenty of blame to go around for our 5-5 record, but, which could be a lot worse, as I said. But looking at our losses this year, which have been very close, I think if Stanton hits, we're probably 8-2. We were never blown out. Those were very excruciating close losses. So for Stanton, this is not an attractive storyline when you've got ESPN running entire features about how dismal he's been. I mean, over at ESPN, they've gone through their computerized records and have come up with this. Stanton is the first player in the live ball era to go hitless with 5 strikeouts in 2 games in the same season. And we're 10 games in. Now, are strikeouts part of a larger trend in baseball? Absolutely. Last year, 22% of plate appearances ended in strikeouts compared to 17% in 2007. And if you go back to 1957, that number was 13%. So the cost of all this power hitting is an increase in strikeouts, which you can live with if the power shows up, which it hasn't for Sanchez and Stanton, at least so far. But look, it's 10 games, okay? 10. And it's not like Stanton is the first player to come to New York and struggle out of the gate, okay? Or the 5th player or the 30th player. This happens. And more often than not, it works itself out, usually on the road. I want to read an excerpt from a New York Times article written 22 years ago, practically to the day, April 14th, 1996. Quote, "The boos and catcalls began when Tino Martinez grounded meekly to second with 2 runners on to end the 5th, and in the 9th, the Bronx cheer was piercing when Martinez struck out. Chants of Donnie baseball could be heard from the upper deck. This was not exactly the way Martinez hoped to win over Yankee fans who still hunger for Don Mattingly at first base. But when you earn $4 million per season," that number seems very small now, "but when you earn $4 million per season and your batting average creeps closer to James Bond's moniker, you can't expect a heartfelt welcome, even if it was just the 4th home game. I've been brutal, so I expect to be booed," said Martinez, now hitless in 16 at-bats and owner of an .088 average, 3 for 34, unquote. Okay, ring any bells? And this is a guy that came over from Seattle, so unlike Stanton, he knew American League pitchers. Now I'll read a second excerpt, a happier excerpt, from a New York Times article again, written 2 months later in mid-June 1996. Quote, "Chants of Tino, Tino have echoed in the stadium lately, and Martinez is now firmly entrenched. He knows it. Finally. Martinez leads the Yankees with 12 home runs and 51 runs batted in, which is 5 more homers and 2 more RBIs than Mattingly had all of last season. The 28-year-old Martinez is batting .285 after a surge of 26 hits in 71 at-bats, and while he is not as proficient as Mattingly on defense or as a leader, Martinez has not been a liability while making 4 errors. Suddenly, his 0 for 16 start at the stadium, during which he said, 'They booed me, which is fine, because I would have booed myself,' and his 0 for 17 drought, with runners in scoring position to open the season, have been filed under another one of Martinez's frigid Aprils. Suddenly, Martinez has joined Bernie Williams as the player Torrey wants hitting in pivotal spots. 'I'm more relaxed,' said Martinez, who is up to .280 with runners in scoring position. 'I was trying to impress everybody and blend in. I had to tell myself to relax. It's easier to say it than to do it.' Martinez conceded that his transition to New York has been the most difficult phase of his career because every mistake here gets magnified," unquote. And then, of course, ironically, when Giambi replaced Tino, he got the same treatment, Tino chants, for Giambi, when he started slow. So look, is Stanton a carbon copy of Tino? No. But like I said, we've seen this before. We saw it with Didi. Exact same situation 3 years ago. And here we are a couple of years later talking about Didi as maybe our best hitter. And there's been a lot of heavy weather made over, fans booing Stanton, which I get. I mean, it's not ideal. A Red Sox fan actually came after me on this regard. He got annoyed because I pointed out on Twitter that for all the media hype over the supposedly juggernaut Boston Red Sox, all they've really proved so far is that they can put up runs on the 2 worst teams in baseball, the Rays and the Marlins. So this guy comes back with, "Shouldn't you be booing Stanton?" First of all, I don't boo anybody. Never in my life. As a performer myself, a musician, I've never been booed, but I know people that have, and it's not something I would do, but I'm not going to sit in judgment on people that do it. Is it helpful? No. Is it hurtful? Probably not. These guys are tougher than people think. You don't get to where Stanton has gotten by not being able to block out a few boos. And somebody else tweeted this: why would Stanton want to play in front of fans who would boo him? Well, I'll tell you why. Because believe it or not, it's better than playing in front of fans that do not exist. First of all, in Miami, you've got attendance that's a total disaster. And second of all, because you don't play in the major leagues to avoid boos. You play to win championships. He has never played on a winning team, and he has a real shot here, and that's why he waived his no trade to come here. And I firmly believe that this slump is a temporary thing, that at some point, could be next week, could be next month, he will go on a tear, win us ball games, and maybe, he won't hit 59 home runs again or win the MVP, but these 10 games notwithstanding, 10 games amounting to nothing more than 6% of our season, Giancarlo Stanton will be a very valuable member of this New York Yankees ball club, and he will turn those boos to cheers. Back in a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Which Yankee was the first relief pitcher to win the American League Cy Young Award? The answer? C. Sparky Lyle. And now here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We ask you this: what is your biggest area of concern for the Yankees right now? And 35% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said too early for concerns. 26% said injuries. 21% said bullpen implosions. And only 18% the fact that our big bats are silent. Now, full disclosure, I ran this poll before Sunday's game, which was kind of a new low as far as offensive incompetence. So had I run this poll after that game, I have a feeling that the big bats are silent option may have inched up into the lead. But as for me, guys, it's too early for major concerns. Minor concerns, yeah, all of the above. With injuries, you hate to see guys like Bird and Hicks, both very injury prone, out so early in the season again. And the bullpen, actually, I think, as I said before, I think the bullpen performance has been somewhat underrated. There have been some bad moments, but you really can't blame the 2 extra innings losses against Baltimore on the bullpen. I think the blame has to fall squarely on the big bats not doing the job and stranding just an insane amount of runners. But again, 10 games, folks. That's my mantra for today, at least. 10 games. And, a lot of people are freaking out at this point, but, somebody wrote on Twitter that, the 2009 championship club started 5-5 as well, which got me curious as to how the other Yankee championship clubs fared in their first 10 games. And so, the internet being the beautiful thing it is, I hit the baseball almanac, and lo and behold, there were a handful that started poorly or worse. 2, besides that 2009 championship club, started 5-5. Those were the 1938 and the 1996 teams. Those 2 clubs ended up with 99 and 92 wins, respectively. 2 of our championship seasons started 4-6. Those would be the 1952 club, which won 95 games, and the 1962 club, which won 96. And those 2 teams ended up winning tightly contested, exciting 7-game series against the Dodgers and the Giants, respectively. And one, a team very close to my heart, started the season 2-8. That's right, 2-8. This was the first season I ever followed as a young 8-year-old, and it was a good one. The 1977 Yankees started 2-8. So before people start drowning themselves in the East River and melting down on Twitter and howling at the moon, remember the 77 Yankees, okay? We got a ways to go, lots of baseball to be played, and this is a marathon, not a sprint. All right, from this week's mailbag, our question of the week here on Bronx Bombers comes from Frank in Decatur, Illinois. That's a ways away. Good to hear from you, Frank. And by the way, the email is joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com, or you can find us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, or leave us a message at 646-854-4959. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Frank writes, I liked your segment you did on the Yankees-Red Sox rivalry. What do you think is the best rivalry in the National League? I'm a Cubs fan, hint, hint. Well, thanks for that question, Frank. You know, I am a diehard Yankee fan, obviously, but even more so a fan of the game. So I don't just live in this ivory tower of the Yankees and the Yankees-Red Sox rivalry. I do recognize that out there in the rest of the country, there are a handful of rivalries that are just as strong or almost as strong. And just behind those, there are a whole host of other rivalries, some of them quite new because of the advent of interleague play. For example, Yankees-Mets got a lot more juice starting in 1997, the first year of interleague play, as did the Cubs-White Sox. There are others, but the two crown jewels as far as National League rivalries are clearly Cubs-Cardinals and Dodgers-Giants. They both date back to the 19th century, and they both, of course, are a huge draw for these four ballparks whenever a rivalry game is held, no matter where the teams are in the standings. So, Frank, my friend, Cubs-Cardinals, which I think you were hinting at there, has a long, rich history, which I'm sure you know better than I do. They've been in the National League together from the beginning. And if you look over the entirety of the last century plus, it's really fairly even, actually, in regular season play, surprisingly even. The Cubs lead the regular season series 1,210 to 1,158. But in terms of championship titles, it's really a long stretch of Cardinals dominance, bookended by Cubs dominance. The Cubs winning the series in 1907 and 1908, and then famously barren for over a century. Although they did actually win a few pennants during those barren years, 7 from the teens into the 40s, although none, of course, between 1945 and 2016 when they finally won it all again. And the Cardinals, of course, have had much greater fortune over the long haul title-wise. Their 11 championships is second only to the Yankees' 27, and they've won the pennant a total of 19 times, with 3 wild-card berths as well. And one of those led to their most recent World Series championship in 2011 over the Texas Rangers, which had one of the most insane comebacks you ever want to see. Equal to, if not better than, probably better than, the Mets comeback in Game 6 in 1986. The Cardinals, I believe, were 1 strike away from elimination twice in that game, in the 9th and the 10th innings, and both times managed game-tying hits, and then won it with a David Freese walk-off in the 11th. But it's a great rivalry, Cubs-Cardinals, and it's striking how many players have actually played for both teams. The Cubs famously traded Lou Brock to the Cardinals in 1964 in a deal which may be the worst of all time in terms of lopsidedness. It's even become a term. If you look it up on Wikipedia, you'll see Brock for Broglio has its own entry. Ernie Broglio was the Cubs' return in that deal, and Brock for Broglio has become a kind of description of any trade that's turned into a lopsided fiasco for one team. But also Bruce Sutter pitched for both teams, as did Dennis Eckersley, and going further back, Dizzy Dean and Grover Cleveland Alexander. And then there was the home run race between McGwire and Sosa, which was kind of a feel-good story at the time and is sort of credited with bringing baseball back after the strike a few years earlier. Obviously, in retrospect, that home run race was fueled by PEDs. I just saw that McGwire said the other day that, even if he hadn't taken any performance-enhancing drugs, he would have hit 70 home runs. Well, if you coulda, you woulda, right? He didn't. So, all that looks quite a bit different with some historical perspective. But Frank, I'm afraid my vote for greatest National League rivalry would have to go to Dodgers-Giants for a few reasons. The first being that neither has had the long stretch of failure that the Cubs have had. They've been very close in quality a number of years. The Giants at this point have a slight edge in regular season wins, 1154 to 1133. But, this is a rivalry that began in New York, obviously, where the Dodgers were more of the blue-collar team, and the Giants fans were viewed, probably with some justification, as more moneyed, more, well-mannered, more elite. But this is also a rivalry that not only survived a transplantation to the West Coast. Dodgers owner Walter O'Malley convinced Giants owner Horace Stoneham, who was considering moving the Giants to Minnesota, to move to San Francisco to maintain that geographical rivalry. But it just seems like there's this ongoing balancing act of alternating success that keeps this rivalry vital and growing. But the other reason, other than parity, is the sheer number of incredible pennant races between these two clubs, including 2 3-game playoffs. This is before the major leagues instituted annual playoffs in 1969. The first of those 3-game playoffs we will cover in today's flashback, the famous 1951 playoff, which was decided by Bobby Thompson's shot heard around the world. And the second was also won by the Giants. That was in 1962. The winning pitcher in Game 3? This would be a great Bronx Bombers trivia question, but the Giants' winning pitcher in that third game in L.A. was none other than Don Larsen. The Giants were the third team after the Yankees Larsen played for after the A's and the White Sox, and Larsen came in and relieved Juan Marichal and won that game for the Giants, who went on to lose a crusher of a 7-game series to the Yankees. They also lost to the Yankees in 1951, by the way. But beyond those 2 3-game series, there have been many instances of pennant races between these two clubs coming down to the very last games of the season. And even beyond that, one of these two teams spoiling the other's shot at the postseason. And much as Yankee fans enjoy Red Sox losses to anybody, almost as much as Yankee wins, Giants fans get that same kind of joy out of Dodger misfortune and vice versa. And again, these rivalries are part of what give our national pastime a lot of juice, and incidentally make Major League Baseball and those teams in question a lot of dough. But great question, Frank. I really appreciate it. All right, so before we close, we've got a special presentation I think you're going to enjoy, a flashback to one of the great Yankee pitchers of the Casey Stengel era and his record-setting season for the ages.
Friday, September 28th, 1951. In the hills of North Korea, a few miles north of the 38th parallel, General Robert N. Young, commander of the American 2nd Division, calls a halt to the Battle of Heartbreak Ridge after weeks of fighting have yielded nothing but bloody stalemate. In Hollywood, a new film called The Day the Earth Stood Still has opened, telling the story of an alien visitor who arrives on Earth with the best of intentions, only to be shot for his troubles. But here, in New York City, the pennant race is all the talk, with the Yankees, Dodgers, and Giants all contending as the season winds to a close. The Giants, trailing the Dodgers by 14 games just 6 weeks ago, have come all the way back, and the two rival clubs are now dead even in first place. The Yankees, facing the Red Sox here in the Bronx, need just a single win to guarantee a tie for first place with the Indians, and a sweep of today's doubleheader would give the Bombers their third straight pennant. Manager Casey Stengel sends out his 2 best pitchers, Allie Reynolds in Game 1 and Vic Rashi in Game 2. 10 weeks ago in Cleveland, Reynolds fought a duel for the ages with flamethrower Bob Feller. The 33-year-old Feller, vying for his second no-hitter of the season, was perfect until the 6th, when a rookie out of Oklahoma named Mickey Mantle broke through with a double. But Reynolds, pitching with bone chips in his elbow, which will require surgery after the season, was untouchable from start to finish, and at the end of the day had his first no-hitter. Today, in Game 1, he is once again in rare form. Although catcher Yogi Berra would later say that his curveball had been better in Cleveland, the Boston batters, including the legendary Ted Williams, cannot solve Reynolds. As he records his 9th strikeout, the prospect of a second no-hitter seems increasingly likely, and nervous excitement sweeps the stadium. Only once has a major league pitcher thrown 2 no-hitters in the same season, in 1938, when Cincinnati southpaw Johnny Vandermeer threw 2 in consecutive games, first against the Braves at home, and then 4 days later against the Dodgers at Ebbets Field. Reynolds would be the first American leaguer to accomplish the feat. The win is never in doubt. Behind Allie's pitching, the Yankees score twice in the first off Mel Parnell, and add 2 more in the third with the help of a rare error by Dominic DiMaggio, Joe's younger brother. Joe Collins adds insult to injury by clubbing a 2-run homer in the 6th, hammering the final nail in the Red Sox coffin. But still, in the increasingly tense ballpark, there remains this business of the no-hitter. With 2 outs in the 9th, an unexpected obstacle arises. Ted Williams hits a high foul behind home plate. The normally sure-handed Berra scampers under it, and just as the stadium is about to erupt into pandemonium, the ball squirms out of his glove, and the chunky backstop goes sprawling flat on his face. Berra is furious with himself, but Reynolds, a good-natured competitor even under the most trying of circumstances, approaches the catcher and says,
"Don't worry, Yogi. We'll get him again."
And sure enough, off the bat of Williams goes another high, twisting foul, this time to the right side of the plate. It is, in fact, a more difficult play than the first, but Berra will not be denied. And as he gloves the ball directly in front of the Yankees' dugout, Reynolds, and then the rest of the Yankees, pile on top of him. It seems, for the moment, that Berra, not Reynolds, is the hero of the day. But the Yankees' work is far from done. In the first 2 innings of Game 2, Rashi is uncharacteristically wild, and the Red Sox touch him up for 3 runs. But then the Bombers swing into action. With Commissioner Ford Frick looking on, they crush the Bo Sox with a 7-run demonstration in the bottom of the 2nd. And from the 3rd inning on, a more relaxed Rashi slips into his typically flawless style. The hammer blow comes in the 6th, when Joe DiMaggio, not to be denied his share of the spotlight, belts a 3-run homer off of southpaw Chuck Stobbs. The Yankees, once again, are champions of the American League. Later, in the clubhouse, shortstop Phil Rizzuto is all smiles.
3 straight pennants. How do you like that? It's almost getting monotonous.
A reporter asks Reynolds if he was aware of the no-hitter during Game 1.
Sure I was. It was up there on the scoreboard the whole time, wasn't it? Hits, 0. But to tell you the truth, I wasn't too worried about it. After 9 years, winning games, and staying in the league, that's what counts.
DiMaggio is asked about his future. He replies, "I honestly don't know about next year, boys. Right now we have some unfinished business, the World Series. And to be honest, I don't really care whether it's against the Dodgers or the Giants." Wednesday, October 3rd, 1951. The National League champion will be crowned today, here at the Polo Grounds. It is the final contest of a hard-fought 3-game series between the Giants and the Dodgers. This first-ever nationally televised game is being watched by millions across America and heard on the radio by even more, including thousands of American servicemen stationed in Korea, listening in on Armed Forces Radio. With 1 out in the bottom of the 9th, the Giants trail the Dodgers 4-2. Third baseman Bobby Thompson comes to the plate with 2 men aboard.
He's got 2 out of 3, a single and a double, and Billy Cox is playing him right on the third base line.
As he leaves the on-deck circle, Giants manager Leo Durocher calls out,
"Hey, Bobby, if you ever hit one, hit it now."
1 out, last of the 9th. Branca pitches. Bobby Thompson takes a strike called on the inside corner.
Ralph Branca's first pitch is a called strike.
Bobby hitting at 292. He's had a single and a double, and he drove in the Giants' first run with a long fly to center. Brooklyn leads at 4-2. Hartog down the line at 3rd, not taking any chances. Locked in without too big of a lead at 2nd, but he'll be running like the wind if Thompson hits 1.
His second is a fastball, high and inside.
Branca throws. There's a long drive. I said it, I believe. The Giants win the pennant. 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 Bobby Thompson hits into the lower deck of the left field stand. The Giants win the pennant, and they're going crazy. They're going crazy.
As the Dodgers begin their long walk to the visitors' clubhouse under the center field bleachers, Jackie Robinson watches Thompson run the bases. After making sure he touches every base, then and only then does Jackie follow his teammates off the field. Thompson disappears into a mob of jubilant teammates gathered at home plate.
The Giants win it by a score of 5-4, and they're picking Bobby Thompson up and carrying him off the field.
But in this game of baseball, glory is fleeting. The Yankees go on to defeat the Giants 4-2 in the World Series. Mantle's first, DiMaggio's last. In Game 4, at the Polo Grounds, Allie Reynolds outduels the barber, Sal Magley. And Reynolds, a good hitting pitcher, drives in a run for good measure. It is the Bombers' 3rd consecutive title, and they'll do it again next year, and the year after that. In later years, Reynolds will play down the significance of his double no-hit season.
The truth is, a no-hitter isn't really the best standard to judge a pitcher. A lot of this game is just dumb luck. I pitched 4 games better than those 2 no-hitters and lost 3 of them.
Friday, December 30th, 1994. 4 days after Allie Reynolds' passing, a memorial service is held. 2 large portraits flank the casket. One shows him in Yankee pinstripes, the other in full Native American dress. Allie was a member of the Creek Nation and a proud Native American. DeVere Pearson, an attorney related by marriage, delivers these words. Allie's nickname during his playing days, Super Chief, was always used with the greatest of respect, but he told me once the nickname made him a little uncomfortable. You see, Allie knew that chief was a sacred title, not to be conferred lightly, and he was not a chief of the Creek Nation. But all Native Americans who crossed his path were proud to call him chief, because he was a great ambassador of Native American values and cared deeply for all tribes and nations. He once told his family that if he had to choose, he'd rather be remembered for his help to Native Americans than for all his achievements in baseball. There is a special place in Native American tradition for the eagle. The eagle is a proud bird, a noble bird. It soars higher and higher into the sky until finally, no longer visible to the naked eye, it comes closer, ever closer, to its creator. Allie Reynolds is an eagle.
And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, subscribe via iTunes or Stitcher, rate and review this podcast, follow us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle, like us on Facebook as well, and most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you again next week.